Brian Buckmeyer at the Law&Crime Trial Network. I'm joined here with Julie Rendelman. Now, currently the McStay case is at recess, so we're about to jump into the Mueller case, which everyone is talking about. We want to show a quick clip of the Attorney General Barr from earlier this morning. So that's Attorney General William Barr talking about the Mueller report. Julie, everyone's talking about this. Everyone's got commentary. Everyone's got an opinion. What are we to make of this?
So I think the thing that many people have a problem with is the fact that he made those statements prior to anyone even being able to review the report. And the problem I think the media had with it is that they couldn't ask the questions they would want to ask because they didn't see the report until he got up there. And so that's one of the issues. I think the second issue is that people have a problem with the fact that Barr seems to put a spin on the report without, again, giving the media, giving everyone an opportunity to review it for themselves so that they can make their own interpretation of what that report said.
Exactly. And then I kind of want to touch on that, what you said about spin. Why is the Attorney General putting a spin, and why is this spin, I guess, the spin to me at least looks like he's trying to say President Trump is clear. It almost sounds like he's talking on behalf of Mr. Trump is his client, but he's supposed to be the Attorney General for the country. So the spin that he's putting on, why is he putting it in this way?
Well, I can't answer for him. I mean, we all know kind of, what happens, many people viewed, Mr. Barr as someone who had kind of allegiance to the Trump administration, and this kind of can be something that those who are viewing it skeptically can view as another indication that he has a certain view of things, and it didn't matter what it said, he was always going to take that view.
Exactly. So everyone's reading, everyone's trying to interpret, everyone's trying to analyze and get to the bottom of this. It's over 400 pages. Some of the clips that we might see and some of the information we'll dive into will actually touch on some of the key points. But for our readers who can't sit down and read the hundreds of pages as maybe you and I might want to do, is there anything that you think we should be looking for, any language that you might have heard that kind of raises your ears and be like, this gives me more questions?
Well, I mean, the big issue, is whether or not there was an attempt to cover up. That, that they found that there was no actual collusion, if you call it that. But, the question that was left for those in the future to decide is whether or not, he did anything, to obstruct justice. And so one of the problems, again, we're going to see when it comes to this report is what's redacted. And are we comfortable with what's redacted? And are we able to really get a full sense of what that report is without being able to see those specific redactions?
So kind of going in that vein with redaction, they've got to redact things because of presidential privilege, because of security, because of just not wanting, maybe not necessarily American citizens, but maybe not the world to know. If those redactions are there and we're not comfortable with it, what then?
Well, that's assuming that the things that are redacted are because there are certain interests that are so vital that we shouldn't be able to see it. I don't know that many who are watching this are ready to take the plunge and believe that those things that are redacted are in fact redacted because they're protecting us, as opposed to protecting Trump.
Yeah. Well, let's look at our next clip and we can talk more about this. So that's more from Attorney General Barr. Oftentimes when I hear this, at least, Julie, the way this person's speaking, we've evaluated this. I disagree with this lawyer. For the viewers, Julie and I are friends, not just here in the Law&Crime, but actually
sort of, yes.
And we always get to a point where we say, hey, two reasonable minds of lawyers can look at one document and sometimes disagree. How much of this is Attorney General Barr saying, well, we read it this way, and other lawyers or Robert Mueller might read it this way, but this is our interpretation, not necessarily their interpretation? How much of it is that?
Look, who can answer? When someone gets in front of an audience, like Attorney General Barr did, and gives this basically written version of what he perceives as what the Mueller report says. We always have to ask first: is this coming from him or is it coming from someone in the White House? By the way, again, I can't sit here and define for you whether or not he committed crimes, because first of all, I, like everyone else, still hasn't seen everything, so we all make our own judgment when we review things. Obviously, we can look at it and understand that there are certain things that were troubling about the report, and it does seem like, at least in some of the report, that that in a sense Trump wanted to obstruct, but those around him wouldn't let him. And so the question becomes, does that kind of mean at the end of the day that he didn't commit a crime? I don't know, but that seems to be some of the things that are said in the report. But who am I?
Yeah, sometimes when I'm reading this, it's, at least for me, I know we probably do this sometimes with our clients in tongue-in-cheek, like sometimes they're not really guilty of a crime, they're just guilty of being really dumb. But it seems sometimes when I read this, it's like, well, he tried to commit the crime, but he wasn't quite able to, or he didn't have the intent. It's odd the way they're kind of phrasing it.
Well, one of the defenses to him is that, is he obstructing if his position is he didn't commit a crime and he didn't do anything wrong and he thinks that people are just after him to destroy him, that is a little different than a situation where you know that you have done something wrong or you believe someone has done something wrong, and so therefore you're working your hardest to obstruct or to try to prevent those outside from knowing anything about it. I think it's obvious, to anyone who's listened to him, whether it be on Twitter or the like, that he certainly says some very strong things that would indicate to many some level of an attempt to intimidate those who are trying to speak against him. As to whether or not that rises to the level of a criminal act, I'm not the one to decide that.
Right. Well, let's come back after break and we'll talk more about this. So again, that's Attorney General William Barr's interpretation of the Mueller report. Now, what I love about Law&Crime is we get to have these conversations about major cases around the country, but sometimes you guys miss a lot of the great stuff that we talk about off camera, so I definitely want to bring this up. We were talking about a specific quote, Julie and I, about something that Mueller said in his report: evidence of a president's actions and intent present difficult issues that need to be resolved if there's to be, quote, a traditional prosecution. And Julie, I think you had a great point about what that might mean.
Yeah, I mean, look, when this investigation began, we see that there were a lot of indictments that came down from it. The president is in a unique situation, and it's not so simple to simply, go after a president. And so I think what Robert Mueller did is he basically made a report that presented every single potential fact that existed, whether it be for or against obstruction, whether it be for or against collusion. They made a determination against collusion because they didn't think they had the evidence. They weren't so sure when it came to the obstruction issue. And so what he did, and we joke maybe he kicked the can, but in a sense, was it a right decision for him to go, you know what, I'm not going to be the one who makes this decision, let me leave it to someone else to do it. And that's kind of what seems to have happened, and here we are.
So that leads me to even more questions, which I think a lot of people are having about this when they read the report. So let's fast forward in the elections. I can't read the future, but let's say, hypothetically, President Trump loses. Does that mean that when he doesn't have the immunity of presidency, that we might see something different that comes out of this report?
No, I don't think it's going to change anything whether he's the president or not. At the end of the day, you also have to recognize something. There may be evidence of obstruction, but you also have to prove not just evidence, and we know this. When it comes to a court of law, we have to prove evidence that's proved beyond a reasonable doubt. So we may all be sitting here going, God, there's a lot of smoke. There's a lot of smoke, and then there's some fire. But can we really, at the end of the day, make out a full prosecution? That is unclear.
So sorry to put you on the spot again, do you think that this is more an issue that's going to be handled in the court of public opinion than the court of law?
I do not see this case going into a court of law, and I don't think most people believe it's going to happen. And I think many people think that Trump won this one. Certainly the way it was presented today, with the fact that the AG was able to get out there ahead of the report and put his spin on it, certainly tells many of us, that those in the media who would normally ask those questions kind of were shut down, and that's an indication that this is one for him.
Exactly. Let's check out our next clip. Redactions. I don't want to speak for Julie, but for some defense attorneys, especially me, they can be sometimes the bane of our existence. What is the prosecution hiding from us? Now, Attorney General Barr laid out the 4 categories of redaction: grand jury materials, disclosure of sources and methods, any information that might impair investigations of other cases, and protecting third parties. Now, those are all reasonable, they all make sense, but you have to trust that the person making those redactions are following that and not going beyond that. Julie, I mean, what do you do when you get redactions from yours?
We're both laughing just because, look, I used to be a prosecutor, and now I'm a defense attorney. So, as a defense attorney, unfortunately, we deal with many a prosecutor who redacts things, and at the end of the day, we find out what they said they redacted for whatever reason ends up either being a lie or a mistake. And so, we're always suspect. We're supposed to be as a defense attorney, and we hope we have faith in the person that's doing that. I think it's difficult for people to have faith based on people's belief that this AG has kind of some skin in the game. And so it's hard to view him objectively when we don't believe he is objective.
Yeah, and even you fully agree. And even that last part where he said something that, at least to me, sounds very President Trump-esque. He had executive power. He could have redacted more, but he didn't. It almost sounds like he's preparing to give President Trump some sort of talking points for down the road.
Well, look, I mean, maybe that's true. Maybe the president was like, I'm not going to use that. One could argue that President Trump likes what it says, because at the end of the day, no one found collusion, and they didn't find conclusively that he obstructed. But I think, there's lines in there's a line, I'll read it. The president's efforts to influence the investigation were mostly unsuccessful. I just lost it. Wait. But that is largely because the persons who surrounded the president declined to carry out orders or accede to his requests. That's troubling, whether we think at the end of the day he obstructed or not, that language is troubling when we're talking about the president of the United States.
Very. Now, we've seen Attorney General Barr just be able to speak, scripted very well. Mm-hmm. The next step is, how is he going to handle being questioned by the press about this? Let's see. So those are a few questions from the press asking Attorney General William Barr about his role here. Just as your bit of your civic class lesson, remember the Attorney General is not the attorney for the president. The Attorney General takes an oath to defend the United States, and they are the head of the DOJ. So as that, do you see any validity or any kind of thing that we should be looking into as to what the press is asking about? Why does your role seem so uniquely geared towards defending the president rather than just giving information? Do you give any credit to those questions being asked?
Well, that is one of the criticisms he has had, which is, does he understand that he is not the president's attorney, but instead he is the AG for the DOJ, which is not the president. And the reason for that criticism, as we all have, not everyone, but some who view it, is that there seems to be some bias in the way he presents this case, including talking about the feelings of the president, which is kind of unusual if you're objectively giving the information. But he's answered many questions, and in terms of what Mueller's thinking was, and the question becomes, is he accurate when he talks about what Mueller's opinions were? We don't know at this point.
Now, speaking about Mueller's opinions, we always hear Law&Crime ask, is the defendant going to testify? Will he come forward? I mean, he's not a defendant in this case, but Mueller, would you expect him to testify and be questioned by Congress? I
don't know. I mean, they asked that question, and he seemed to indicate that he would have no issue with it. I think the issue, one of the issues that was raised in one of the questions is the fact that we don't, it's quite unusual to, and in terms of the issue of indicting a sitting president. And they're asking, is that the only reason he chose to not come back in that report and say he had obstructed? His response was, no, that's not why he did it. He just didn't have a conclusive answer, so he left it to either him or to Congress to make that decision. As to which one Mueller thought was going to be making that decision, it's unclear.
Now, so who takes up the mantle, I guess, at this point? If Robert Mueller kind of leaves it up to someone else, is it then up to Congress to pick up this information and say, we want to go further? It doesn't appear that Attorney General Barr is going to. I mean, he's talking about the president's feelings and how this basically exonerates him. And we're seeing now on the screen snippets and clips from the Mueller report that were quoted and kind of stated in sum and substance, I guess, by Attorney General Barr. are we just left in this place now, or like what's the next step?
I think there's going to be more to come, but I think there is a sense of fizzling out. That is my opinion. And it's not about taking sides. It's just, has this run its course in a sense, and are we going to be focusing on other? We don't know what Congress is going to come back with. There's certainly more questions to be asked, and I think they're going to continue to ask questions not just about what the report revealed, but also about what redactions happened and whether or not they were proper redactions.
We'll be back more with the Mueller report, so stay tuned. Be back in a few minutes.